Alright, this is NTI for Wednesday, March the 18th. Today we'll be covering Japanese internment during World War II. So, Japanese-American relations. So, President Roosevelt, FDR, issued an executive order. An executive order is basically, it kind of has the effect of a law, but it only deals with things that the executive branch gets to deal with. So it's not like you can completely just create a new law, but you can affect the executive branch. So, as Commander-in-Chief, FDR passed Executive Order 9066, which basically said all Japanese Americans living on the West Coast were to be moved from the West Coast and sent to internment camps. These internment camps are, they're not at all like concentration camps or anything like that, obviously. But at the same time, these people were being ripped out of their homes. They're given about 48 hours to get rid of everything. Usually they lost almost all their wealth. And it was only Japanese ancestry that was required to relocate. It wasn't German or Italian or anything like that. Why were they relocated? And really, the big reason for why they were relocated was because the U.S. government claimed they couldn't determine who was loyal to the United States, what individuals were loyal to Imperial Japan, especially those living on the West Coast, which obviously that had been the most likely area Japan would invade. And so they said, we can't be having, citizens living on the West Coast who are spies or who are helping out the Japanese Empire. So we're just going to round up all those individuals and we're going to put them in these camps, which are basically their waiting centers. I guess you want to call them that. And you would just wait out the war. So the obvious, violations, constitutional violations of this. First off, there's no due process. Right? Due process is this idea that when you're accused of something, the government's going to, indict you. They're going to put charges against you. Then you're going to have a fair and speedy trial. A jury of your peers, all that good stuff. But none of these individuals, the only thing they were guilty of was having Japanese ancestry. So therefore, they had no trial. They had no anything. They just immediately, you're Japanese, the government's coming to get you, you're going to these internment camps. And this is obviously also a violation of the equal protection of law found in the 14th Amendment. I'm saying that everyone's going to be treated equally regardless of their race or ethnicity. And obviously, these people were just being treated this way because they're Japanese. What it was like in these camps, this is from a little boy that lived in the internment camps, and then they talked to him many years after he was out. Does the government really hate me this much? Do they really think I'm this awful? It's a hard thing to accept, and there's no answer. I don't blame any individual, but I really never been able to be friends with somebody I knew before I went in. Not that I blame them. I don't think I blame them. Still, there's this division. I think that most people don't like to talk about. They'll talk about going to camp. They'll talk about going to school. They'll talk about going to dances, playing baseball, and they'll talk about everything else. But when it comes to the real person feeling about why we were there and what it meant and how we felt about it, I think most people don't want to talk about it. Maybe they don't even want to talk about it. So these, people kind of felt like, why is it fair that I am being put in an internment camp, right? Just because I'm Japanese, they felt definitely discriminated against, and they definitely felt like, there's this division of us versus them. Us inside the camp and them not inside the camp. So there was a challenge to this, okay? There's obviously constitutional violations in this, and so the challenge was brought by this guy named Fred Korematsu. He was an American or Japanese ancestry that refused to follow this order. And so when they said it's time to go and he said no, he was arrested and imprisoned. So why was he in prison? Well, he's in prison because he didn't follow an executive order because he is Japanese. I mean, basically, when it comes down to it. And the court ruled in favor of the U.S. government, saying that the president was within his constitutional powers as commander-in-chief to protect the nation from espionage, which is basically traitors, and an invasion. So this is, if you really put up the worst Supreme Court cases in U.S. history, Korematsu and the Dred Scott case, which, basically said slavery was, constitutional. Those are generally, most people consider those as the worst two cases, because basically this chose presidential power and fear over constitutional rights. In the majority opinion, they had a very interesting reason. A majority opinion is the opinion of the court, so it was a 6-3 decision. So 6 justices signed on to this opinion that said, like curfew, exclusion of those Japanese origin was deemed necessary because of the presence of unascertained number of disloyal members of the group, most of whom we have no doubt were loyal to this country. It was because we could not reject the finding of the military authorities that it was impossible to bring out immediate segregation of the disloyal from the loyal that we sustained the validity of the curfew order as applying to the whole group. In the instant case, temporary exclusion of the entire group was rested by the military on the same ground. The judgment that exclusion of the whole group was for the same reason a military imperative answer, the contention that the exclusion was in the nature of a group punishment based on antagonism to those of Japanese origin. That there were members of the group who retained loyalty to Japan has been confirmed by investigations made by subsequent to the exclusion. Approximately 5,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry refused to swear unqualified allegiance to the United States and to renounce those to the Japanese emperor. So what does that all mean? Basically, the court's saying, okay, we can't differentiate between those Japanese Americans who are loyal to America and those that are loyal to Japan. Therefore, because we can't, tell who's loyal and who's not loyal, we're just going to throw them all in these internment camps. And we have proof that there are some that aren't loyal because, there are these people who are refusing to take loyalty oaths. Well, loyalty oaths basically is, unless you're taking an oath to the Constitution as a member of the United States, as, a sworn member, loyalty oaths are kind of unconstitutional in itself. Forcing you to proclaim loyalty to something you could really argue is unconstitutional on itself. So the court says we can't determine who's loyal and who's disloyal, so we're just going to throw them all in internment camps. Well, imagine if we did that after 9/11. You say, okay, we can't determine what Middle Eastern Americans are loyal to the United States and which ones are loyal to Al-Qaeda and terrorist organizations. So we're just going to put them all in these camps until we can figure out who is loyal and who's not, and we can deal with this issue of terrorism, right? I mean, could you imagine the press order? And a lot of progressives don't like to talk about this because, FDR is supposed to be this, progressive rather than the New Deal and everything. But he also issued this pretty on its face racist executive order against Japanese Americans. So this is the dissenting opinion. So these are the 3 justices that were, I guess you could call them in the losing opinion. Okay, this doesn't have any law basis, but it explains why they disagree. The exclusion of all persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, from the Pacific Coast area, out of a plea of military necessity in the absence of martial law, ought not to be approved. Such exclusion goes over the very brink of constitutional power and falls on the ugly abyss of racism. Being obvious racial discrimination, the order deprives all those in its scope of the equal protection laws as guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment. It further deprives these individuals of their constitutional rights to live, work where they wish, to establish a home where they choose, and to move freely. In excommunicating them without benefit of hearings, this also deprives of their constitutional rights to due process. yet no reasonable relation to immediate, imminent, and impending public danger evidence supports these restrictions. So basically they say, okay, the constitutional rights that are violated here, your equal protection, right? We're not protecting you equally under the law. Your due process, right? There's no trial, right? There's really no evidence presented against you other than just you're Japanese. And really it prevents people from being Americans, right? Being part of America, you can live, work, and move about freely, right? If you wanted to, when you are an adult, at any time, you can just get up and say, hey, I'm moving to wherever. Well, these Japanese Americans couldn't do that during this time because they were stuck in internment camps. So that case stuck for a long time, and eventually in 1988, President Reagan acknowledges this issue, says, this is a wrong that we must, we can't right it, but we can at least acknowledge it and try to help these people out. So they paid reparations to these people. So what a reparation is, basically, it's a payment for past harms. So the surviving people who lived in these internment camps were paid reparations for what the government put them through. And it was only a couple years ago, in 2017, that the Supreme Court acknowledged this was bad, and they overturned it. They said, look, this clearly has no constitutional standing. An individual can't just discriminate against someone on the basis of their ethnicity. And so in 2017, the Supreme Court officially acknowledged and overturned Korematsu. This goes as definitely one of the more black eyes during World War II. As the nation really bonded together and came together, they overcame several obstacles. But one of the I guess you could say, black eyes, or one of the elephants in the room, was the fact that Japanese Americans on the West Coast were interned because we couldn't determine which ones were loyal and which ones were disloyal, but it didn't happen to German Americans or Italian Americans. All right, that brings us an end of today's NTI lesson. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at, we're going to be debating about the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. So we'll be looking at some cases for dropping and against dropping, and you're going to be an advisor to the president, and you're going to explain why we should drop the atomic bomb or why we shouldn't. If you have any questions, please email me. Stay safe, and hope to see you all sometime soon.